And I'm going to check the stream. Live, it says live, but I don't see it. You are live, it says.
Yeah, okay, we'll let the headset go. It's not really connecting to this computer. So as long as you can hear me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out why it says we're live, but it's not in the link. I think I have to give people a new link, probably.
Okay.
It says 3 watching. What the fuck? How's that?
Testing, testing.
Nah, the issue is I have to figure out why, because we are live, but we're not in the channel I think that people are in. I think it created a new link, and so I have to redistribute it. But I don't know where to pull the fucking link.
Do you want to try killing this and restarting with the same link?
No, because it's nothing to do with us. It's to do with...
Okay. Better.
Yeah, it's a different link. Okay, I just have to give them a new link. Let me just tweet this link out, and then we'll wait a few minutes, and we'll start.
Cool. Wanted to put up like an inspirational quote here, but I don't have a chance. I feel a little bit inadequate. Hopefully it'll be okay. I'll pull one up
Relax, you're doing fine.
for myself. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. All right, everybody in the chat on YouTube, can you hear us okay and see us okay? Oh, they can't see me. This is the problem. They can't hear us either. Is that true? Can you hear us? Okay. So what did I fuck up here? Why? Check, check, check. All right, so I'm gonna have to manually switch this, I think. I don't know what I did wrong. And why am I cut off here? Okay. All right, we're gonna start. My video feed looks pretty shitty on YouTube, but I'm just gonna ignore it. Everybody, you can hear us okay, right? You can hear me?
Where do the messages come in? The
Let me give you the YouTube link so you can go to and then you can pop out the chat if you want to.
the YouTube link is on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you just click on that, you'll be able to look at the chat.
Let me pull that up. Yeah, there it is. One second. Okay. Is this the correct link, or are you doing a new link?
I'm gonna turn you up a little bit. They said you're too quiet. Don't. I did it on my
Is
end.
this the correct link, or are you doing a new link?
The link is my recently tweeted link on my page, or I can put it in chat here too.
Yeah, just throw it in the chat in case. Oh yeah, okay, I see it. I see it.
Yeah, and you can actually pop out the chat if you want, so you don't have to have the feed. That way you can close the window.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Great.
Pop out chat. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to pull up my questions and then we'll start.
Let's do it.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Michael Dubrovsky from PoWx or POWX, however you prefer to say it. Basically, I have a bunch of questions about your project, and I'm just going to run through them. And if there's any kind of commentary that you want to stop and talk about any of the topics more, we will. For now, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background in crypto. Anything that we should know.
So people are asking me to turn up my audio. Is this better? Or should I try to go get? I can go get headphones.
Now I can turn him up on this end. Just
Let's see if this helps.
should be okay. Leave it alone for now.
Leave it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what in crypto?
Yeah. What's your background in crypto? Tell us about what PoWx is supposed to be.
Yeah. So I've been libertarian for maybe around the time that Bitcoin's been around, and I'm not a software engineer, so I haven't contributed to it in any way like that. Probably around, I was running a startup in a totally unrelated field in, I want to say like 2013, 14. I was like really had the pull, the Bitcoin pull, and I almost opened the poker site in Bitcoin. I was like talking to an existing poker site about like opening a Bitcoin version. And then my stupid, terrible startup got funded or something, and I forgot about it. But I spent like solid month trying to build this poker site, so I basically failed to do anything. Then I did buy some Bitcoin, and like a petty amount, and then closer to like what was it, like November, not of last year, but I guess the year before that, so 2016. I started looking at it again. I mean, I'd been watching it, but I kind of started convincing myself, like, wow, yeah, this might actually be a world-sized thing, right? So not just dark web stuff, which I think is great, but for a lot of it is great. I mean, some of it is evil, maybe, but I thought maybe this could be really important for people that aren't doing purely illegal things, but maybe like interesting gray area use cases. I'd been living in China for a while doing manufacturing, and like pretty much everybody there is. Actually getting distracted by the chat. This isn't an ICO, madcap.
You can just close the chat. It's hard to get used to this.
Yeah. I'm gonna close the chat for a second. But so pretty much everybody in China is living in like this gray area of sort of being compliant with the government. So like in some way, right? And this is, I think, typical even in America, but I mean, in China, it was crazy. Like every factory I worked with was doing some kind of roundabout thing to evade taxes, and like nobody there can leave with their money easily, right? So to leave China with your money in your minds, like to just put a code in your mind and walk out, is a totally revolutionary thing, right? So I started really thinking about that, and I was like, okay, maybe I should buy some more Bitcoin. But then after I left my company, which was like in March of last year or February, closer to February, I actually looked at like the technical, started looking underneath the hood. So very recently, right? It's only been, whatever, like a year and a half. I actually started looking underneath the hood of how the thing worked, and it was awesome. I really fell in love with like proof of work specifically. I thought was just a great. Just didn't know anything about it before that. It's just an awesome technical thing, right? And it's cool. It's very cool for me that it meshes with my interests in like libertarian things and economics and so on. And it's like a very complex system, which I really like thinking about. So yeah, whatever. And then I just realized that there were these two really like serious problems in it that I felt like nobody was really addressing. I mean, I guess maybe Chia Network is the closest thing to somebody like really working on this. I don't know if there are others that make as much sense or or as fundamental of a solution. But just looked to me like nobody was dealing with this stuff. Everybody was talking about scaling, but they were talking about scaling in transactions per second. And I was like, well, what about like security? Like this thing doesn't seem to scale. The security of this thing doesn't seem to scale. So like, what's the point of having a bank, like an offshore bank, that can do, a million transactions a second if you're not sure if you'll have the money later? Right? So that was kind of, which is like right centralization and so on leads to that, right? Like you're not really sure if you'll have the money later. So it kind of if this was going to grow to be,
How does mining centralization put your money at risk? Like, what danger are you talking about when you say
I think
you won't have your money later?
so what it is like it works fine, right? Like I think Bitcoin works great now, but as it gets bigger, right, and more of a problem for, I mean, I think it becomes more of a problem for governments, right? And governments both physically have force, like they can go just put guns to people's heads, right? And if there's just a very few people that you have to, whose heads you have to put a gun to start freezing accounts or something like that, that's probably not a good thing. And secondly, governments own power plants, right? They own all the sources of power pretty much. I mean, all the cheap sources of power. So you, at the level at which people are mining already, but I'm imagining, look, this is the thing. People think a lot about what Bitcoin is like now or what it was like 5 years. Like I'm pretty new to this. I'm just thinking about what it would be like if it was 10 or 100 times larger, which is like the size that's interesting to me, right? Like, so like at the scale of offshore banking. So offshore banking is like, from what I've read, is like $14 trillion sized industry approximately. And I mean, who knows really, but it's definitely much bigger than Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin's going to compete in that, it's going to be a very much of a thorn in the side of like every government. And
Wouldn't you say it's fair that, like, if you think that this is how government controls electricity or something like this,
sure,
wouldn't it also be fair to say they basically control anything within their jurisdiction? Like, uh,
yeah, but there's different things that some things are easier to control and others are harder. So like, I don't know, chip fabrication I think is significantly harder to control, right? Because it's like you can't literally turn it on and off in the same way as power plants. Like there's a totally different dynamic there, right? Like
I
people,
mean, what's different? I mean, you walk in and you
well,
shut it
it's
down.
portable. Once you buy the chips, they're yours, and nobody, you can move around with them. It's not straightforward. Like you'd have to arrest a shitload of people and do all kinds of things, right? But with power, like if you have a warehouse, you're mining Bitcoin in it, and you have a 30 kilowatt power line to it, like they can just show up. Like you can't move, you can't go anywhere, right? It's totally different if you have to use power. And like I mean, people are like renting waterfalls from governments and reopening like power plants in Australia, like coal power plants in Australia to mine Bitcoin. So it's not. I mean, it's not as light as you would like, right? But we're getting kind of stuck in the weeds. I haven't even talked about.
Yeah, I have a few other questions I want to ask before we get too much into abstract stuff. So my next question is, who else is on the team? Who else is working on you with this?
Do you want me to go through what PoWx is, or you
Oh,
asked
you
a lot?
said, well, it's relevant. Who's on the team?
Oh, okay, cool.
Is part of who what PoWx is. So.
Yeah. So the team is still small, but we're in conversation with a bunch of people who are like we're talking to people about that are interested in either doing full time or being advisors. But it's so I started the company, or the foundation in Israel. I mean, I'm not sure where like physically it'll be based, like the whatever the where the jurisdiction will be. But one of the main kind of advisors, partners, whatever, is Guy Carem, who's I mean, it's the Spindulus Tech founder.
Yeah.
So he when I met him, 5 months ago or whatever, and explained to him what I was working on, he was super excited because I mean, it just made sense, right? So he knows this part of Bitcoin really well. So he was probably the first person who really got it out of the people I met. Like I went to like a couple conferences, and people would just tell me like, no, proof of stake, man. Like this is useless. Like you don't need to fix proof of work. It's gonna be fixed with like EOS or something crazy, right? Like magic. So
Oh,
he's the first person who really got it.
Spondoolies
Um,
did fail as a company, though, right?
yeah, things happen. I mean, this
Just
is such
adding
a
that in there, just it's
yeah.
relevant, I guess.
No, but I think that's not I'll take there's like a Russian expression за одного битого двух небитых дают, which is like for one person that's like gotten beaten up solidly once in their life, they give two unbeaten people at the market.
Yeah.
Like somebody who's had an experience like that is worth a lot,
I didn't follow Spondoolies too closely, but I know that I remember when they were closing, and I also remember that Olivier Janssens was, I think, involved with that as well, and he's not one of my favorite people in Bitcoin.
Okay.
Um, I don't know, you
I don't
know,
even know who it is, to be honest with you.
yeah. Anyway, you were telling me about PoWx.
Yeah. Um, So I should say like one sentence about what PoWx is because we've gotten so deep into this, right? You don't think so? So it's just quickly, it's we're building a proof of work algorithm that could be used in Bitcoin or possibly other networks. But our goal is Bitcoin as the first goal. But that can be specifically designed to be accelerated with silicon photonic chips. And the idea being that you shift the cost of mining mostly from electricity to hardware. So it's more of a hardware depreciation type proof of work. And this gives you a bunch of interesting benefits. There's also decentralization benefits in the way that silicon photonics chips are produced because they're produced on very old CMOS. They use thick wafers. So like the new Bitmain, ASIC is going to be 7 nanometers, and people use like around 200 or nanometers for silicon photonics just because of the nature of light. Like you need a thicker waveguide. So
Is that still going to be, because it's a silicon wafer, that it's still primarily going to be most efficient to make it in China?
I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of the fabs, silicon photonics is pretty new, and a lot of the fabs are in Europe and America and so on. But you know, it's so early in this process. Like, we're not going to be making it in China at first. The one that we're the prototype and like the production units that we're looking at doing, we're not going to be making them in China. But I'm sure somebody will be making these in China if this works out. That's just the reality.
You mentioned that PoWx is a nonprofit organization, and it's
Yeah,
not based. It's not actually formed as a company yet, because you said you're not sure where it's based out of, right?
yeah,
Right.
not formed yet. This is
Um,
all just we just kind of threw this up to see what people would say.
but as part of this whole plan strategy you have with PoWx, are any of the same people or related companies also going to be doing a for-profit business for manufacturing the devices?
Yeah, so the idea is that PowerX is going to be independent and it's going to do open source stuff, but it's not going to produce any hardware because I mean it's just that's unrealistic. So I'm going to run not PowerX, but the for-profit company. It's called Arrakis Photonics. So that will be a company dedicated to producing miners. Yeah.
Okay. Um, And you mentioned a little bit about that you were looking at how the proof of work algorithm works and you were interested in it. How did you come up with, or who came up with this specific idea of using aspects and photonic chips and such for proof of work?
So I started out with kind of the idea. I started at a very fundamental place. So I was like the most energy efficient and distributed and would be like people burning $100 bills at home, right? Like that would be if you could prove that you burned a real $100 bill. If that was provable, that would be incredibly energy efficient. Anyone could get $100 bill. Like it would be amazing, right? Um,
Sounds a lot like burning energy in proof of work that we have.
kind of, except energy is not. I don't think it's as easy to get your hands on it. I don't know. Do you mind? Like, do
I
you
have in
mind?
the past, not currently.
Yeah, well, I think, I got an email since we put this up. I got an interesting email from this 17-year-old kid, or I guess teenager, that he has 20 ASICs in his basement, like ant miners, that he can't run anymore because of power costs, right? So I think, yeah, it's not easy to get your hands on. But anyway, so it's easy for some people. That's the problem, right? Like if you have friends in the government, you can get really good deals. Uh, Whatever. So my thesis was like, can we find something else? And I started thinking about analog computing. I mean, partially, to be honest, I just have a fetish for kind of interesting, complex, like physical systems. I did chemistry and stuff like that in my undergrad. Um, but yeah, I was thinking of like pretty crazy stuff. But eventually, about 8 months ago to 6 months ago, I started zeroing in with advice from a good friend who's probably going to be full time in this. I started zeroing in on silicon photonics. Like we were reading a lot of papers and looking at different analog computing systems. But the idea is basically that some things are really efficient at doing computations, but it's very hard to get them to do useful computations. So I thought, okay, yeah, well, we could probably design something where it's doing useless computations, right? That's a totally different problem. Like that's why you don't see an enormous amount of analog computing today, although there used to be more before, right? It's just that there was this great period where silicon transistors just got better and better forever, which is actually like slowing down, right? But there was this long period that killed everything else, where you could just keep improving just by going down in wafer thickness and other things. So it was that. It's a long answer, but
It's okay. What is photonic mining hardware? Like, how would this actually work? I know proof of work is essentially just like a dice roll. So, how does this work to do the dice roll? And does it have any like weaknesses in being random or any other things like this?
so our first attempt at doing this, like what we're working on for the prototype, and just full disclosure, like we're not sure it's going to work yet, right? But it's not like we've rigorously, sorry, we've rigorously proven to ourselves like this particular approach will work. But the idea is just to do a very similar proof of work to Bitcoin, but to include in the proof of work behave. So like instead of SHA-256, you have something else that you're doing that might be like a digital hash with some other stuff. And it's similar to kind of what proof of space time is, as I understand it, where they take a hash and they graph some things to it to force you to use a lot of memory. So similarly, we're adding math into the proof of work that's very fast on the optical system. So we're intentionally adding a lot, like making most of the work that you're doing in the end be something that's instant in the optical regime, but pretty hard in the digital. Not impossible. So you could still
I
mine
mean,
it.
is it? Are you sure it's going to actually be harder than the digital? In other words, are you actually confident you can make a proof of work that will
Yeah.
be horribly inefficient for an ASIC, but really efficient for a photonic device?
Yeah, so there's some pretty interesting things that so integrated photonics has been around for a while, but specifically silicon photonics in the last 20 years has really been blowing up. Like it's doing really well. And so there's a bunch of commercial products out there that are like mostly used in data centers, but they do FFTs already uh, to process the data. So they do some computation type thing. But there's a ton of work and multiple companies trying to commercialize things that do computations, like what are called coprocessors. So they do specialized computations with light. Not everything, like not every computation works well in light, and it's analog, and there's all these other problems. But light is incredibly fast. You barely have any losses. It can operate like in the terahertz regime. It's like it doesn't interact with itself very much, so you get almost it's like super energy efficient if you use it in like in ways where you don't run into like various problems, right? I don't know. It's hard to go into like full detail, but basically, it's clear to a lot. Like if you read the literature or are in the kind of industry, it's clear to most people that computers one day and maybe not too far off will have optical chips in them, or at least part of what they're doing, or they're going to have them as part of the overall architecture. But some of the first applications are things like not what we're working on, but some of the first kind of non-crypto things are neural networks. So there's a couple companies trying to do optical neural nets. So because optics are very good at doing like multiply and accumulate stuff. And it's nice because neural nets are okay with like fuzzy results, which is what optics give you, right?
Yeah.
This analog.
Are optics good at generating random numbers? Because that's pretty much what proof of work is, right? It's just a dice roll.
Mm, no, I think we're gonna have to. There's gonna have to be a digital component to probably to so there's most okay there's a this is a complicated answer. There's this amazing thesis work 2001 or something called physical one-way functions, where he does makes these like super unique credit cards that could never be copied. He just takes like a glass ball that it's like molten glass that I don't remember actually how he manufactured them, but each glass ball is so unique that when you shine the same laser through it, you get like a completely different interference pattern coming out. And
But
he
that would
was
be the same pattern every time. That's not
Oh, well,
randomization.
you could vary the laser, but anyway, this is not how we're doing it. This is but anyway, optics can give you a hash. Is my point. A lot of people do this. It's called puffs, physically unclonable functions, whatever. But it's more interesting to get the random numbers. We think right now digitally, and then do some processing on them optically. So you can generate random numbers optically, but it's difficult to make that modelable digitally. Although people try to do that also with some success. But if you can't model it digitally and you have to have an optical system just to check, just to verify the block, for example, that doesn't seem great, at least to start. Like that's not a system that a lot of people will want to, work on because you want to be able to verify everything digitally, right? So, given that, probably the random numbers will come from the digital part of the chip, and the optical part of the chip will just do some processing.
Yeah, I mean, it does start to sound like you're gonna just make an ASIC with an extra thing on it, like because it sounds like you're still gonna need the ASIC to do the mining, from how you
Mm,
just described.
no, because so okay, not I mean, I guess you can try to you could say there's going to be a digital component to the chip, right? So, but the point is that not that the goal is for like 99% of the work. Like if you're going to do the work digitally, 99% of it will be something that can be accelerated optically. So basically, if you have the optical version of this chip, right, it's what's called a coprocessor. Like the coprocessor on the chip is going to do most of the heavy work, and it'll use light, so it'll be very efficient. That's the whole idea. It's make it all optical because then you run into all these problems is like is this modelable and so on. So it's possible maybe that down the line it'd be interesting to make it all optical because then it'd be even harder to attack, right?
Yeah,
But
I'll admit so far it sounds more like experimental technology and not necessarily something we would want to be throwing on Bitcoin. It looks like you still would have to prove something before that it even was demonstrated as working at all. It sounds like really new. Um, I don't know too much about optical. I tried to read a little about it, but one thing I read about was a concept called a problem with optical regeneration, where basically one of the challenges is dealing with noise and dealing with loss. Like as you mentioned, it wasn't very lossy, but if we're talking about digital, how are you going to handle loss? And is this an issue with designing these chips?
there's a so if you put waveguide. So first of all, let me say that the as far as new, I mean, ASICs are obviously commercial and you can make them and so on. As far as new, interesting architectures go and so on, this is probably the most commercializable one. So basically, once we do a prototype, if we like it and we want to move forward with doing a production run, there's literally we can just place an order. Like there's PDKs already and fabs and so on. So it's not like this is not a research project in the pure sense. This is more like applied engineering. So we're not trying to develop new optical components or anything like that. Because that would take years for sure. We're just taking stuff that's been built up in the last 30, 40 years and do it, or maybe more like 50 years if you look at the whole history of the field of integrated optics. And we're just taking stuff that already is out there and combining it. So it's more commercial than I'm making it sound. I'm just being a little bit reticent, right? Um, to answer your question about loss, so there's all kinds of problems like that, right? But they're pretty manageable. So there's things like if you have two waveguides near each other, they might have like crosstalk, and so that limits the density of the chip because there's just like the light will leak out of one waveguide and end up in the other one. But sometimes that's useful. Like you actually use that to do some computation sometimes. But when you don't want it, there's ways to deal with it, like using smaller wavelengths of light, which are easier to confine. But that does limit like the how small the footprint of the chip can be. There's also obviously attenuation in the thing. There's like imperfections in the silicon and so on. So you do lose some light. Um, but it's I mean everything has limitations, but these systems are amazing. Like they're incredibly efficient in some in like if you use them correctly. For
Now,
example,
oh,
we were looking at
okay.
doing we were looking at doing some loops in the optics. It's what they call kind of the concept is called like reservoir computing. It's when you send some light in and you let it kind of bounce around in the system. And if you check on it, so light is very fast. So if you check on it every CPU clock, a lot has happened during that period. So you're sending light in and it kind of equilibrates at a particular point that gives you a computation. And so one thing that is problematic is like the light makes so many loops around the system during one CPU clock cycle that the stuff you put in at the beginning might already be attenuated, like it's already been absorbed down to the point where it's just noise. But so you only remember the circuit will only remember, let's say, the last X percent of the one CPU cycle, but still it'll be a lot, right? It's just if your CPU cycle is so many nanoseconds long or whatever, then you're only going to get so many computations out of it. You won't get the full thing because the light will have just been it's bounced around too many times and it's been absorbed. So there are, but you can deal with that. So for example, silicon photonics has something like an order of magnitude greater losses than silicon nitride photonics, which is just a different kind of wafer. So there's ways, but silicon nitride has its own it has its own downside. So but there's ways to deal with it. There's also two photon absorption, which is a whole different issue. But anyway, but that's avoidable too. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but
It's good enough. Um,
yeah,
Now, light does use electricity. Like you do need to use
yeah.
electricity to run these things. Why? Explain to me the concept of how these are going to use less energy, and why somebody wouldn't still want to use as much energy as possible just through your mining machine.
So kind of I'll go through the economics and then the physics because I've been, like talking up a storm about the physics. So the economics are that the way I see it, and maybe this is wrong, but every year there's so much, assuming that the price is stable or fluctuates like kind of around 1 point, which it's never is, but there's a certain dollar amount that's being paid out by the system to the miners, right? And the mining ecosystem will definitely not spend more than that. In fact, it'll probably spend less because people want to have a margin over what they're doing. So they're going to attempt to spend, let's say, 80% of the total payout of the system, right? Is that
I don't think that's a given, but I don't think it's fair. We know that mining. We know that miners aren't necessarily always acting rationally, and there are some other aspects of the system that incentivize a miner to mine at a loss as well. For example, like starting, if you want to buy your Bitcoin this way, you get to have losses. So if you have enough fiat to where you can use your losses against the difficulty increasing rate and still manage to get more Bitcoin out of it this way, it is a good idea to go ahead and mine Bitcoin because now you can claim your expenses against that
yeah,
income.
yeah, that's a
Um,
good point. I didn't consider that. But okay, so that's a great point. But I mean it's bounded somewhere, right? There's a bounded amount of money that you can make doing this. Maybe it's 120% of the total Bitcoin payout. I don't know. But given that there's a bounded amount of money and people won't spend more than this set amount, one would think, or like that gray area, right? It seems that if the hardware is a greater component of the total cost of running it, you'll get less energy and more hardware, right? Like it's just so today X%, Y% goes to hardware. If the ratio was heavily towards hardware, there would be there'd just be less energy used because the total dollar amount spent would be the same. That's the thesis or similar, right? So people aren't going to spend 10 times more money just because they're saving 10 times on the energy. It doesn't it so you see what I'm saying? Like there's definitely going to be more miners in existence because the energy is cheap. So you can spend more money on the miners. But it won't be proportionally so many that you'll use the same amount of energy if that's what you're asking.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to conceive, honestly. Like it seems to me that that making light is going to require a decent amount of energy, and in that you're still going to be using digital aspects. Like you're going to need some kind of normal chip in there also. So like I don't know how much efficiency we're really talking about here, and whether or not it's going to actually have a large effect on again, I even question the goal you're going for as far as reducing energy
Sure,
costs
sure.
as a means to solve centralization. Even that we'll talk about, and I question that as whether that's a solution or necessary in the first
You're just
place.
not sure if it's gonna work. Yeah.
But even if I want to assume that your product uses less energy, how can energy costs not still be a huge factor? You know, like even if you reduce energy costs, you're just giving more headroom to put more miners installed. So it's like you're moving energy costs to physical space costs, and you're having to grow in size instead. And governments can take land, and just the way that they can shut off electricity and they can regulate land
No, so,
ownership
so
and
I'll disagree with that because if you have 90% lower energy costs or something like that, energy use, you don't really need cooling, right? So it can be much more compact. I think one of the reasons things are big is just like warehouses and so on is A, you have to run large power lines, and B, you have to cool the whole thing. So you couldn't put it all on a small box. So I think it'll be significantly more.
but these
Uh,
machines will be bigger, right?
no, no, why? It's just
The chips are bigger, no?
the chips are like, yeah, like a centimeter footprint or something, or less. It's not like they're not like large, they're I just mean bigger, like on the tiny level that we're talking. These are the waveguides are like in hundreds of nanometers in thickness, in width.
Yeah.
uh,
But I honestly don't know what other what other types of hardware are involved in supporting this system and how big the devices will actually be. And in the end, they're going to look a lot like small computers, and people are going to fit as many of they can in whatever space they can afford to rent, right?
yes, correct. But really, I think cooling is a large factor in how the whole thing is built now, right? So if you didn't have to deal with cooling and running large power lines, it would be much more flexible in like where you could put these things, how you would distribute them, and so on. But yeah, to answer your question about like whether this will actually use less energy. So again, look, until we do the prototype, which we're hoping to have by the end of the year, it's I can just say stuff to you, right? Like it's hand wavy at this point, but there are multiple companies working on similar products for harder problems, and they're all projecting. I mean, of course, they need to raise money and all this stuff, but they're all projecting, very, very energy efficient chips. Like that's the whole point. So there's been tons of money put into this, into startups that are doing this kind of thing. So it's not like pie in the sky. Like they're trying to deliver products that are for like harder use cases. So I'm pretty confident that we'll get something working. But and we're not like out here like doing a token sale or something saying please invest. We're doing we have revolutionary shit like send us money, right? So until we have the prototype, I think it's totally reasonable to be skeptical, right?
Hmm.
Uh, even want to argue the point, really.
Yeah. You mentioned that this will all be open source. Does that include all aspects of the code for proof of work and for code for the hardware and the hardware design? Is this totally unlimited ability for everybody to participate in manufacturing and using the code?
So we haven't fully decided. Like we just haven't. First of all, because we haven't built the prototype yet, we don't even have the full list of everything. But I mean, we have obviously the high level, but everything that'll be developed. But overall, the goal is to open source the photonic design because that's the part that people really don't know how to do. Maybe. And although I think even if we didn't open source anything, we'd have a bunch of competition. But the goal is, yeah, we're going to open source the software, of course. Um, Private companies, like even our miner manufacturer, might do some internal development that's not open source. I don't know, but I mean that would be already at the level of like at the level of doing some kind of integration or something. But I think we'll definitely be open sourcing enough to make it work, right? Like so to let other people actually go out and quickly become manufacturers. Um, I know it's a vague answer. Again, I look. I,
Yeah,
mentally,
I only say it because you're the one that mentioned it, in your documentation. You say that it's going to
yeah,
be open source. You're saying it's a
yes,
good, you're using it as a way to talk about why this is a good thing or
yeah,
promote it. So, you're putting it on the table, and I
yeah,
think that it's only fair that if you're going to put it on the table, that it ends up being true that you're
100%.
gonna give the world the ability to use this proof of work for however they want and to make hardware for it.
So the software that the algorithms and stuff will for sure be open source, right? Because it's not even usable if it's not. The hardware, yes, also. So this is going to be somewhat in parallel, right? Like the foundation is just going to be doing research on this and releasing open source stuff. And we're going to also, part of the money, if and when we raise money for the for profit to do actual manufacturing, we're going to commit to donating part of the money to the foundation, right? And so they're going to be separate and doing their own work, right? So the foundation is going to be releasing open source stuff maybe indefinitely, like maybe for the next 15, 20 years if it's working out, right? Or maybe longer. So it's basically the whole thesis of the thing is that it'll be open source, and I won't be in control of it. Like I won't be in sole control of it. So it's not there was no like bait and switch kind of thing. So the whole it's like dedicated to fixing this problem in an open source way. In general, I think it's just to give you like a piece of my mind about the like kind of what makes sense here. Like I think it's not even profitable to do this not open source, right? It's not even like what Bitmain is doing is kind of a short term thing, right? Like it's like it feels like if they really wanted to do like a 20-year like
I mean,
grow.
slow down, man. It's pretty hard to say that what Bitmain is doing is not profitable. I mean, look, they're
No,
like
it's super
valuation
profitable.
is like 14 billion or
Yeah,
something as of recently.
no, they're killing it, right? I just think if they wanted to, but Bitcoin is small, right? Like if you actually start with the thesis that it could be huge, like actually 10 times bigger than it is now, then doing all this stuff that like jeopardizes it. If you're going to be a market leader, maybe not a monopoly, right? But if you're going to be part of the market in a meaningful way, it's better to just give up something and let the thing grow, right? Like I don't think it's that exciting to try to like like own 60% of everything and keep it like at 100 billion and just like sculpt it for money.
We'll
You
see.
know,
We'll see when you own 60% of mining whether or not you're not excited to keep it.
it's funny. Yeah, it's so great. No, but really, it's so funny. Some people have been accusing us, like saying like you guys are just gonna try to become the next Bitmain, and some people have been saying like, what are you talking about? Like Bitmain will just kill you. Like Bitmain will set up fabs for this and make it, and they'll become like dominant in it again. So I wish I could get those people together to like have an argument. Like, are we gonna be the next Bitmain, or
Yeah,
is
you have me. That's why we're here. We'll get to that.
yeah.
My next question is, you're specifically targeting Bitcoin with this. Why? Does it require a hard fork? And do you intend on submitting like a BIP, a BIP proposal for getting this?
So why Bitcoin? So I think to me, Bitcoin. So I care a lot about the store of value use case. I think there's a lot of other great use cases for blockchain, and the currency use case is interesting too, right? But I think the store of value use case to me is the most interesting, and there's like privacy coins that do this also and so on. But Bitcoin is the one, right? So I just it I mean, it would be amazing if I wanna make it better, right? So I don't know. It's clearly very hard to make any kind of change in Bitcoin. So we're gonna try this, and we'll take a real crack at it, like an honest try to like work with. I mean, I'm on this interview, right? Like it's not. I'm serious about this, about like dealing with Bitcoin people, right? But at some point, we're gonna have to test this and so on. So just to even see if this is safe and usable, I don't think Bitcoin will. I mean, some people have like emailed me proposing things where there's like a way to phase it into Bitcoin such that you can like test it without like compromising the entire security, right? Without shifting from SHA, you can like, test it
Well, I'm
by
sure you can test it and plan to test it before trying to put it on Bitcoin,
yeah.
but
But why Bitcoin? I mean, I just think if it's possible. So I think look, fundamentally, it seems to me that like Bitcoin will have to add tech to like stay dominant, right? And Bitcoin has the best chance of growing into something that's $1 trillion in size, right? Like as a and being like an amazing offshore bank for people with no access to that and so on. And I don't really know the Bitcoin community that well. I'm just starting to like get a taste of it on Twitter and so on. But I think it's pretty divisive, right, or whatever. But I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. Like this kind of thing, if it actually works, should be I think at some point it should be a no-brainer. So we'll see. But
yeah. But would
maybe
you would you go through the normal processes and submit your work as a BIP and submit it as in an optimal way? Like if it was able to soft fork in an additional proof of work, or are you looking to hard fork, and are you looking to do this kind of on the side on your own?
no. So for Bitcoin, we would go through the standard process and not do. We're not going to do a Bitcoin fork. There is a chance that we would do something with another chain, like a privacy coin or something, and it would be a good way to test that's like to actually see if this is secure, like on a smaller network, so people can try attacking it and so on. But we're not going to come out with a Bitcoin blah and give these coins to all the previous holders of Bitcoin and come back on this show and get really angry. We're
Okay.
not gonna do that. Yeah, so we might do something else to try to get a product out there, but we won't do that.
You mentioned in your slides that hardware depreciation is one downside. Can you tell me about that and tell me about any other downsides that you already know are aware of for what your solution includes?
No, actually, so the idea is that hardware depreciation is a major cost for you if you operate on this network. So basically, as these chips get better, the chips that you already have running will get less and less profitable, right? So at some point, if you want to run a mine that makes a lot of money, you'll have to buy more chips. So that's all that means. Ensures
So
that
it's the
there's
same as what we have in that regard.
yeah, it's just more intense, right? Because a greater percentage of your cost is hardware.
Hmm. So in that way, it is a little bit worse.
Um, it just favors people that have capital over people that have access to good electricity costs, right? I don't know if
Which miner has the most capital right now?
yeah, good question. I don't really know much about mining actually, or anybody that mines.
Come on. Just say it. I'm going to make you say it.
No, of course Bitmain, of course. But I think, look, I think that's not first of all, that's not a permanent, that's not a permanent situation necessarily. But we'll see. I think it would be a disaster if they were mining on this on the OPOW, right?
I mean,
Uh,
I do think it's important, man. I mean, we're saying there's a problem. They
yeah.
identify the problem. You're saying that you have a solution, and then we're both agreeing that the most likely outcome of your solution is that we have the same person with the same problem.
No. I think that's the base case worst case scenario. So the worst case scenario, besides like the it being insecure or something, is that Bitmain recaptures their position. But this is throwing everything into the air and letting it land again. And I don't think Bitmain has a lot of entities have a lot of capital, right? Including companies that do chips for other things, right? Like Intel has a silicon photonics chip out, right, for other purposes. So I don't think Bitmain and all the ASIC people that are, part of it is that Bitmain has great talent, right? It's not just money, but all of those people don't know anything about this, right? So maybe they have somebody on the team, but it's not the main thing that they do, right? So and the whole thing is different, right? Like it's in the slides, but just the upfront cost of getting into manufacturing this is lower, and uh, it's so I think there's a lot of people like people just make predictions about Bitcoin and all this stuff, but it's like clearly not possible. So I'm not gonna say no, Bitmain won't, win the competition in this. This is just like super complex. So, but I think there are many scenarios which are better in the end, and even Bitmain winning the competition, you would still get more decentralization because people would be decoupled from power plants. And I would argue, even if Bitcoin was centralized,
I mean, but I'll argue the opposite. I'll say that because of the cost of electricity being a big factor, we're seeing more and more mining places pop up in other parts of the world where electricity is cheaper. So we're getting at least geographic decentralization. That seems to be ironing out okay. We have more new manufacturers coming on the scene recently, other than Bitmain, that are making machines. And a big issue I see with your solution is I haven't heard anything so far that says that China isn't going to be the best place to produce these machines. They're the best place to get silicon wafers made in the world, right? And I don't see why they wouldn't be able to make yours, even if there's a specialization required. There's no huge fabs, I'm going to assume, for this specific thing, so it's going to most likely be adopted by Chinese fabs because of the value of Bitcoin or something like this. No?
so there are fabs for this, and there are commercial products and so on. But so I mean, da, 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 da. So I guess I'm trying to think of which part of your question to answer. So the first question was you mentioned the decentralization due to like power prices. So I think that's a bit of false security because it's something I wrote this in the presentation. It's something like distributed proof of stake, but for governments. So you have 20 governments that hold whatever X% of the total Bitcoin mining pool, and it's like pretty trivial for them to get together and say, look, we don't want this to happen, or we want to freeze these accounts, right? Because these people are doing something we don't like. and just go to the miners and say, look, it's over, right?
Right, but
And
that's just increasing the electricity cost to infinity. That's all that means. So they'll go
no, no,
somewhere
no.
where it's
They
cheaper.
don't have to. They don't have to do that. I think they could actually seize the stuff or extort them or anything. Right? It's not clear that they'll just tell them they can't use the power. I think it would be something much more aggressive, right? Like they would just proclaim it illegal, seize everything. I mean, you're in America, yeah?
But in your solution, it'd be even worse if they came and seized the machines because that's more of the value of the company.
Well, my
That's a
solution, the
higher
machines
capital
don't have to
expenditure.
be the machines. A don't have to be so concentrated because you don't need the economy of scale of getting cheap electricity and cooling warehouses, right? And
There's
also,
always economy of scale. You're not going to get rid of that by changing the machine design.
you get rid of part of right. You get rid of the extreme nature of the economy of scale. So like somebody with one box will definitely have bought the box for a higher price and so on, but they'll still actually be able to participate profitably, which is not the case today. So you'll get a lot of smaller miners, A, and B.
But you already said that's not true because these machines will depreciate even faster than the current ones. So smaller people are going to be even in a shittier position and less
It'll
likely
be
to mine because
it'll be
they're going to have to
profitable.
keep buying a new machine all the time.
I mean, maybe you'd have to keep buying one every year or something, or every 2 years, but it would be profitable to buy it. So I don't know. I mean, why not? But it's unclear to me that there's any difference there. But no, I was gonna say also this is just again it's lighter, right? Like it doesn't require you to set up a permanent location that has a large power hookup and so on. So be much harder to close down. That's all I'm saying, right? So again, I'm not gonna sit here and say I know what's gonna happen, right? Because I think nobody does. But some of the scenarios that are possible with this are very interesting and impossible with the system that's set up now. And the best we can do to try to grow Bitcoin is to try to steer it at least in the direction that has some good scenarios at the end, right? That actually has possibilities that are positive.
I don't know. I would argue that we're already seeing the worst of the current scenario. I mean, if there is a mining centralization problem, say they have 70% of mining to control, they
Mm-hmm.
aren't currently attacking the network. The worst that
Right.
we've seen them doing is creating Bcash and
Yeah.
basically scamming. They can use their power, their position to kind of scam people and
It's
lean
actually
on
called
people.
Bitcoin Cash. Okay.
Okay, I understand. um, but you understand what I'm saying? Like we're
So
seeing
I
the
think
worst of it because if they had any other reason to attack, they would attack. You know,
so.
and
Yesterday, yes, I have a perfect response to this that I didn't actually write. Yesterday, Bram Cohen was kind of being skeptical on Twitter about what we're doing, and but anyway, the he has this pinned tweet which I think is amazing. It's cryptocurrency centralization is like harvesting metal off a bridge, a slippery slope of free money which works until suddenly it catastrophically doesn't. So I think what he's talking about is that if you have a centralized entity like Bitmain, what happens is they might be benevolent, right? Like they're not necessarily evil. They have self-interest, right? Like they want Bitcoin to be okay, right? They might not be super long-term thinking, but they want it to work. The problem is that they're a single point of failure. So like everything's going fine, and they might even, in some ways it might be safer like on a short-term basis because they have so much hash power and stuff. But at some point, there's other ways around the hash power, like more physical ways, right? And so that could be that's a risk, right? And so one day, Bitcoin could be doing great, and one day the Chinese government goes after them and says, "Look, these billionaires are moving money out of the country with Bitcoin, and like you have to freeze their accounts." Right? And that wouldn't even be like the entirety of Bitcoin breaking. It would be just like one dude's accounts, right? But that would already, to me, that would already mean that the next billionaire is not going to want to put his money into Bitcoin, right? To move it or to store it, right? Or 10% of his money or whatever, right? So it already makes the whole network less interesting for like larger use cases,
yeah,
right?
but I don't think we're going to see, censorship of specific accounts like you're talking about. I think that we'll probably have privacy features already working in Bitcoin that are going to make that nearly impossible
Right.
anyway. Even right now, the amount of plausible deniability you have just moving from one address to another is pretty damn high. So I think it's going to be pretty difficult to be doing that in places other than exchanges. The place that they care is where you're turning it into dollars. I don't think you're going to see them start leaning on miners to do this. It's possible, it's theoretical, but
Yeah.
I don't. I think we're looking at what the worst case scenario is now. We're looking at what they do with it, and what would they do that they're not doing already now? They could do like rollbacks. They could roll back blocks, but that costs them just as much to do. You know what I mean?
Sure.
They're going to lose the money if they do
No, I
that.
think it's
So
in their interest.
the
It's in their
incentive
interest.
design was intentional. The incentive of design was supposed to make it so miners only could control what miners do. And
It's
yeah,
in their financial interest for this to be working fairly. I agree with that. I don't think they're going to be malicious intentionally. Um, so I think
so doesn't that mean the worst they can do is throw their weight around? Like they can affect market price, sure, but I don't think they can kill Bitcoin just by being big.
they
If it,
can't kill it. I think they just create this really meaningful risk, right? Which may or may not happen. And I think there's a real we're not at the level yet where governments are like crying about this, right? It's still small. So compared to other financial system pieces of the financial system, right? Which are, bigger problem for them, I would argue. But if so, the whole question is like, if this is going to grow, how will it grow in size? It'll grow with, large amounts of capital flowing into it as a store of value, right? And for that to happen, I would argue it has to be safe, and safe even from scenarios like that would be better, right? I don't know if it's impossible for it to grow as a like Bitmain run thing. It's different than what was planned, I would say, and I think it's a worse sell to say, okay, we have this company, it's like incentivized to do it well, and hopefully nobody will like influence them. That's like a weaker argument than this is like fully secure due to game theory and cryptography. Like, that's it, right? Like there's no single point of failure. It's an amazing argument. um and I don't think, yeah, again, I'm not like making predictions, I'm just looking at different scenarios, and like I think that the direction we're trying to go in is a better one. That's all. It's like on average.
yeah. Um, are there resources required in making this hardware that are like rare? In other words, like silicon, I believe is cheaper or more of a resource in the East. And are there certain like specific resources or stuff that could be also leaned on in the supply chain of making this hardware?
A great question. So the one interesting thing that's happened in integrated photonics, and integrated just means, on chip photonics, is people used to try to design light-based stuff, like light-based components and chips, using expensive systems, like 3 to 5 in the periodic table, and lithium niobate and stuff. And what's changed in the last 20 years is that people have been able to very cleverly, I mean, it's been some really amazing scientific work done in the last 20, 30 years to make photonics work on silicon, like on normal silicon wafers, which was not possible before because silicon is like not a friendly material for this. It's very hard to modulate, like it doesn't respond optically to a voltage, things like that. So, like, you can't put a voltage on silicon and get a different optical response, which you can with other materials. So, the point is that if I was doing this 20 years ago and saying we're going to do this on lithium niobate or whatever, then or some other gallium arsenide something, I think that would be a bad idea for the reason you're saying, like that there's going to, well, not necessarily a bad idea, but it would be weaker because of this, like it's exotic, right? But the amazing thing about silicon photonics, and really I think 10 years from now, it's possible that what we're doing will be obvious, right? Like people will be like, this was obvious, right? Because silicon photonics is like right at this part of the curve. Like they have a couple commercial products out from different companies, and there's a bunch in the pipeline because it's solving this problem of being able to do optics in silicon, which started getting solved like 20, 30 years ago, is like totally revolutionary. So uh, that's my roundabout answer. I mean, silicon itself, like the actual just regular wafers, I don't even know if there's I mean, silicon is like a very abundant element. I'm sure it's cheaper in China because that's where things are made. But it's possible that in the end, that comes out to be negligible once you apply the entire kind of spectrum of.
Yeah. The issues I see so far are that you're admitting that Bitmain does have the most ability to spend capital on mining hardware, and that it is at least possible that they would end up being the largest player in a photo, mining process. And you're saying that silicon is still a major aspect of the manufacturing process, and we do know that silicon chips and wafers are primarily made in China for whatever reason. It's cheaper, more efficient, they're better at it. I don't know. I'm not privy to the specifics, but I'm pretty sure that they just are more equipped for it for whatever reason. So if it's going to already likely be mostly made in China, already most likely be manufactured by Chinese, we're kind of not really solving the geographic or the Bitmain problem. And so what problems are we solving? I guess maybe you're moving the cost to, putting a little more weight on physical space. So maybe we'll get decentralization from geographic aspects in places that are cheaper to buy land. But I don't know. It seems like it's like the same but different, but the same.
Yeah, I think I'll probably just stop doing it. uh, so, so look, I think it's not obvious. I think it's not obvious that it'll be made in China exclusively. I also think,
Will
I
you at
mean,
least say that it's likely?
no, the funniest thing for me, honestly, is that, and I'm sorry to like answer this in a stupid way. The funniest thing for me is that I have to both defend the fact that people are saying we are trying to become the next Bitmain and we will be like this horrible thing, and the fact that people are saying Bitmain will kill this and be in charge. Like it's I don't
For what
know
it's
how to.
worth, I haven't said that yet.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. I'm making you argue with the other people. Yeah, but so first of all, I think so. I have a lot of experience manufacturing in China, not semiconductors, but I set up a pretty big factory there that had a lot of suppliers. And actually, I think there is a bit of a countercurrent. So before I left my previous company, I actually moved the final production to Michigan. It was like a shit show. Shortly after I left, the governor of Michigan came to like cut the ribbon of the factory because there's some, it's like people are employed there or whatever. But I think it's not as exciting to manufacture in China as it has been in the past. I honestly have not spent the like hours needed or the days or whatever needed to really look into whether China is going to hold on to their advantage indefinitely for semiconductors. But I'll tell you that photonics is majorly happening in Europe and America and not in China. So
I
as
mean,
it stands,
when you say majorly, do you mean that's the biggest places that are currently doing it, or they're actually really huge operations? Like, in other
well,
words,
so
from what I can tell from photonics, it seems like more of a specialized area that some people are interested in trying to develop to be,
there
a
is a
future
bunch of
technology that
there is
everybody uses.
startups. All the companies that sell commercial products are not based in China. So
Right,
that's
but my point is that are they all also very small?
no. I mean, Intel sells so these products get used in data centers already like heavily. So Intel sells a silicon photonic transceiver. So it's just you
Where
haven't
does
heard.
Intel make their chips?
Uh, it's a great question. I have no idea, but they have fabs in America. Like they do. I used to have a consultant in my previous company that worked at a New Mexico facility doing production for Intel. So I can't answer where they make that chip, but I would guess not in China because all the expertise is not in China. So if you look at where the papers are coming out about this stuff, if you look at where the companies are, it's all Europe and America. I mean, there's a bit of like maybe Korea and Singapore, but I think the percentage is very high on the side of
Yeah,
Europe.
I'm looking at a list right now, and it says that Intel has locations in the U.S., several in the U.S., several in Ireland, then is a couple in Israel, China, and Costa Rica.
Yeah. So,
I don't know if I'm
but
looking at the right thing, but I just looked it up real quick.
no, that sounds right. I could send you a list of this is circa 2016, but I have this list of like all the companies that were working on silicon photonics in 2016, and it's pretty big. It's not
Yeah,
trivial.
I
Um,
just I guess even when you consider that Bitmain is already a big player and they're in China and they have certain efficiencies for doing chip fab there, I would just have to think that if Bitcoin actually switched to this, they would just make instead of making the new latest round of S20s or whatever they're going to call their next machine, they would just make these instead. No.
uh, this is funny. Guy commented in the comments saying China doesn't have advanced fabs. He actually knows a lot more about ASIC manufacturing than me, obviously.
Well,
Uh,
what's advanced? I mean, we're talking about ASICs, and we know they make the ASICs there.
um, I think he means fabs that do, semi. experimental things like this, right? It's not experimental, but like new cutting edge stuff. So they end up with things that already have been around for a long time. But I can't speak for him. He actually just left. I just looked at the chat and he's
Yeah.
like, I gotta go. Anyway, so look, I think that so first of all, the other thing is that by the time this gets released, the dynamics of the system will be very different. So like Bitcoin has been around that long as like a kind of something people really like people in the mainstream know about. Like large companies haven't really started making miners. They're starting to, right? Like Samsung and stuff. But yeah, I think by the time we release this, there will have been enough time for A, large players, and B, startups to get into this, especially because we're actually attempting to make it decentralized, right? As opposed to hiding everything and trying to get control of it. So that's the best answer I can give. We can move on to the will you guys become Bitmain question now if you want.
Yeah, we can get to that. My next question is kind of related anyway. You mention in your slides, you say, in some sense, an openly centralized solution would be cheaper, faster, safer, given the status quo. What did you mean by that?
Oh, I just mean that it's getting funny. Like it's almost like a Cayman Islands bank with like a online platform that you can log into would be like better than Bitcoin if you have Bitcoin controlled by one party. It's just kind of funny.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's obviously not the state that we're in.
That's me trolling. That's
You
that's
probably shouldn't
that.
troll in your slides. Just you know.
It's an open source project.
But yeah, so let's talk about that. So let's assume that Bitmain is killed by this, optical proof of work
They won't be
setup.
good. They're going to
I mean,
participate no
let's
matter
just anyway, and now you have a starter advantage in that you're the first ones developing technology. You're the first one. You're the have the most experience with
what.
the software related to it, and you're obviously going to be the first ones to make mining machines and sell them to people.
Yes.
I assume that's your plan. It's okay if it's your plan, but I think other people will obviously start to criticize you, like how you mentioned. They're going to say, okay, so you're trying to make a new proof of work, make all of Bitcoin use it, and then sell everybody the shovels, right? Like,
Yes.
so how is that better? Why would that be any better to trade? Having I maybe say you haven't said where you're going to incorporate, but if it's U.S., if it's Russian, wherever it is, they're going to have their own set of arguments as to why that's a bad place for Bitcoin to be centralized, right?
Sure. I think the chances of us, Bitmain, so some things are equilibrium things, like steady state outcomes, and some things are path dependent. I think Bitmain's position in the market is path dependent. Like Bitcoin could have gone a different way, and there wouldn't be this one centralized player necessarily. It's unclear to me that with ASICs, you would just end up with one centralized thing, right? But now that it's that way, it's very hard to change it. And, they're about to release a seven
I
nanometer,
yeah.
which is going to kill everybody. But
I think it's
which
still unclear, though. I mean, I think we're
Yeah,
starting to see
it is
signs of
unclear.
it decentralizing. Like, yeah, we see articles about how this pool or that pool has 42%. Oh my God, almost 51. Well, it's not quite almost, but it's a majority of it.
Well, it's unclear who
Um,
owns the pool, right? And like who's really in the pool. So it
right,
becomes
and we can't know, and that's a good thing about big mining, and there's a bad thing about mining. I know that there are some people that want to design different pool structures and improve in that area, but in the
but
end.
let me get to your question. Let me get to your question. Uh, so I think so basically I think because we're at a different era in the Bitcoin history, right? I think it's very unlikely because Bitcoin's I think it's not going to be, $1,000 next year or something, right? I don't know where the price will be, but I think it'll be significant and people in the mainstream real world, not maniacs like you or me, but real normal people with normal careers and stuff are already considering getting it, like real companies and so on, and experts in photonics. Like I was talking to somebody yesterday that's starting a neural network photonics startup, and he was super interested in doing a product for this, right? So much more mainstream people are interested in doing things for Bitcoin. So I just think the chances will be to like I think Bitmain won because they were professional. Like they weren't fly by night. They actually like delivered good product and didn't fuck around, right? So
I would argue that they won by cheating. They won by basically mining with their machines before they sold them, so
yeah.
that the impact of the difficulty never
But wasn't
affected them, and it
everybody
only
doing
affected the
that?
people they sold
Wasn't
to.
everybody doing that? Every like company that sold miners was doing that secretly.
I don't know every single one. I mean, we have no evidence of any of them doing it
Yeah,
really. I mean, we have some
yeah. Okay.
evidence with in the early days with like not ASIC miner, but Avalon was accused of this when they were doing the first Bitcoin mining machines. But you know, BFL also Butterfly Labs was accused of doing this, and I'm pretty sure they were guilty. But other than that, we can't ever prove it. But I don't know if you want to say they got to how big they are by being professional. I think that they did have an advantage
Yeah,
geographically.
look, they
Um,
did everything right. They probably cheated, and they also I think took it seriously and made long term investments and hired very good people and so on. So it's I think they didn't do it by being a 2-bit like bullshit operation, right? That's just all I'm saying. And I think in this next phase, nobody is getting into Bitcoin mining as a or mining in general as a 2-bit operation, right? Like people are taking this very serious and serious people doing it. So the chances that we'll be able to dominate a world market for these chips, given how many companies there are getting into photonics, and given how much more confident investors are about investing in Bitcoin mining than they were in 2013, right? Because people weren't even sure if Bitcoin would be around, right? So I just think the chances that we could build a monopoly in a market like that I would it's like I'm glad people are optimistic about
they're
where
about as low as the chances of the market accepting your proof of work.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I just think, like why even, right? It's I don't know. I'm glad people are like, I'm glad people are confident in us.
All right, I have a couple more questions, I think, and then we can wrap it up, or we can get to any other stuff you want to. My next question is all right, so there's a scenario where I see here, and like people like to have conspiracy theories, like to have some kind of narrative as to why certain actors in Bitcoin behave the way they do, and sometimes I try to think about why somebody like Cobra Bitcoin is always trying to advocate for a hard fork for the proof of work, when it's something a lot of people consider risky and dangerous, and now he's also put his name on supporting what you're doing. I don't know if he's involved at all, but maybe you're Cobra. I don't know, but either way, one scenario that I see that's a problem with proof of work is if you do try to unseat the largest player and that large player wants to throw his weight around, are you not creating an opportunity for him in changing the proof of work to where, especially how they've set themselves up with something like Bcash, where they can create a narrative now and say, oh, you know what? Fuck Bitcoin changing the proof of work. We're going to take all of our huge amount of security and large amount of hashing, and we're just going to throw it right on Bcash right now. Just as just the threat of anybody taking optical proof of work seriously, we're going to play some games. We're going to say, okay, our position is at risk. Let's start throwing our weight around. Let's actually go ahead and pull out these cards that we were scared to use before because this is our end game now. And they're going to say, okay, let's throw all of our proof of work onto Bitcoin Cash, pump Bitcoin Cash, and make it look like the greatest thing in the world. Sell all of our Bitcoin. In the meanwhile, start a optical fab just in case, so we have a round of machines ready, and do both. And now, what Bitcoin actually did was it gave up the most compatible, most supported proof of work in the world that had the most miners that actually wanted to mine with it, and it said, fuck all you guys, we're going to change. And then all those people actually represent maybe what was a significant part of the Bitcoin market, and they don't change, they move. And now you're left with a weaker Bitcoin. With maybe you're more decentralized, but you're still weaker and more easily able to be taken over by people with capital expenditure powers, even if it isn't Bitmain.
These what ifs are rough, yeah. So I think what would happen? It's like trying to predict. You're looking at like some
Well, we're
wild.
talking some game theory, I guess, and I'm no game theory expert, but I do think it's important to
No,
think
I think
about
nobody is.
all of the
I think
possibilities with when you fuck with
no, no, no.
Bitcoin. You know,
This is a legitimate. So it's unclear to me. So I think this would be a huge risk for Bitmain also, right? So it's unclear to me. If we're
what's
talking
the
about
risk? What's the risk?
why don't we do it now if there's no risk?
Hmm? Because now,
Uh,
no, because now Bitcoin isn't changing the proof of work. This is a
no, but I'm
scenario
saying
where we're
if it would be if
we're
it's
trying to design Bitmain out of Bitcoin. Is basically what your goal
yeah.
is.
No, I look. I think they're going to compete in this. We're just trying to design out their like their supremacy.
But isn't that the goal of any change of proof of work to design out Bitmain, like to design out
But it's
the
not.
largest player?
I'm not so like we have to. These people should be like mopping floors somewhere or whatever. I think they'll be producing miners indefinitely, and like maybe they'll move their SHA-256 line over to Bcash. Yeah, but I think also it's like I think they've made a real attempt at making Bcash dominant, and it doesn't look to me like it's working that well, right?
Oh no,
And
it's
I think it's a
but we don't want to
real
help, is what I'm saying. We don't want them to say, well, let's just put all our proof of work on Bcash.
this optical proof of work thing is going to take a really long time, right? Like I think we agree. You agree with me, right? That
I,
it's not like
yeah.
it's not going to happen overnight.
I mean,
If
it's
it
not,
happens,
I would stop it. It's not going to happen, but
yeah. Well, I got, dude. I would be careful making predictions about Bitcoin. It's too complicated. Like it's always
no. This is one thing that people have said to me lately: is be careful making predictions about Bitcoin. I'm not making predictions about what will happen. I'm making predictions about what won't happen, and
yeah.
I think it's much safer to predict that Bitcoin won't change than predict that it will.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to buy me a beer if it happens. But anyway, uh, so and I don't have to deliver anything if it doesn't happen because it's always indefinitely like right ahead of us, right? Like
Doesn't
it's
sound
just
like
like
a very good bet.
we're always just 30 years away from fusion. But yeah, man, I think it would be really risky for them to do it very aggressively because they would essentially be giving up their position in the dominant store of value of in crypto to try to do something that would be clearly, just be clearly malicious. uh, I think they would have enough time if we were going to do this at all, right? They would have enough time to set up manufacturing of the other miners, not necessarily
Yeah.
to be dominant in that market, but to be involved. And I think what would end up happening, and I think you see this, I'm no expert in kind of Chinese diplomacy or whatever, but I think Chinese people tend to their philosophy tends to be to have like Cold War instead of straight up,
Well, I want to point out that I brought up this
uh,
example for a reason. This actually is what happened when they were threatened in the past. This is what they did. They just didn't do the version I explained. What they did was when SegWit 2x was coming along, and they basically made a public announcement that if the hard fork doesn't work and blah 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 blah, we're going to fork anyway. And basically, Bcash is a result. Bcash was threatened before it happened. They said we will fork, and then they went through with it when things didn't go the way that they planned. So they were trying to make an effort to stop SegWit unless they could keep big blocks. They lost that effort, and as a result, they attacked. They said, okay, here is the safest way for us to attack without us losing all of our money. We will create a spin-off of Bitcoin and basically suck in anybody that's stupid enough to get distracted by it. And we're going to use that as a way to, and we're also going to make it so we can reuse work. We're also going to make it so we have a bad EDA difficulty setup so we can go over there and just take all the cream every week or two and come back to Bitcoin. And they set it up perfectly for miners. We can still use ASIC boosts, blah, blah, blah. They made their little dream world, and they said, okay, this is what we're going to do if you want to fuck with us. And I think that if you put them in an actual life or death scenario where you're going to say all of your hash power is going to be worthless on Bitcoin as soon as this new proof of work takes place, I think we would see similar behaviors or worse, no?
something, dude. Of course, they're gonna have a response. I don't think they're gonna say, once we release our prototype, they're not gonna invite us to their office and say, you know what, we're gonna close down the ASIC stuff. Let's do this optical proof of work. Like, yeah, they're. I think if this becomes a real thing that actually is going to happen, and probably when that happens, it'll still be a year away from happening, right? So it's not like just it's just going to happen overnight. I think they might try to do some things. I don't think they're going to do anything as drastic as selling all their bitcoins. And I mean, if they're going to be a public company shortly, by the way, they're doing an IPO. I just don't think they're going to be even allowed by their governance to do crazy shit, right? So I think there will be a little bit more sanity and a little bit less like really aggressive tactics because they're going to be public, but also because now they're I mean, I think they tried this, right? And I don't think it really worked. Like Bcash is it worked a little, and going full throttle on that, I
We
don't.
don't know what work looks like to them. Work just has to be that they made money from doing it. They made more money than if they didn't do it. We'll never get to see their books. We'll never get to see,
Sure,
how many
sure.
people are holding the bags and
Yeah,
who's
it might
holding
have
how
worked.
many.
It might have worked as some like short term play or whatever. But I just mean I think them giving up Bitcoin is just a it's something they'll probably threaten to do, But and I can't tell you whether they'll do it, but it sounds to me like it would not be in their interest in any scenario. Like they're doing something where they split their effort, right? And they focus more on Bcash. Makes sense, and maybe that's fine. Like maybe Bitcoin can be $1 trillion coin in 10 years or 5 years, and Bcash can be $100 billion coin. I have no idea, if they like focus in on it and grow it and try to actually make it useful and whatever. I just yeah, man. I can't. That's the best I can do.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. My last question, I think, is in your I want to say white paper, but it's just slides. In your slideshow presentation, you mentioned that you want to target Bitcoin, but then you also specifically mentioned targeting privacy coins as candidates for using this proof of work scheme. Why are you mentioning privacy coins in targeting them?
So I'm really interested. We're really interested in the store of value use case. Everybody on the team, and I think privacy coins have something, and if Bitcoin implements privacy, I think it would be less. The other coins would become less interesting. But pending Bitcoin implementing that, I think those coins have to exist, like for the ecosystem to be healthy. So I think there's no argument to be made, like, oh, it's like only Bitcoin, no privacy coins. Like obviously people need the privacy coins. So
So you want to target them because you think they're worth more, basically.
I think no, I think they're a necessary component of the store of value equation. Like maybe you keep it in Bitcoin, but you go through the privacy coins to do things or whatever, right? I just think that it's there. I just really like what they're doing. That's it. And I
Yeah.
think they use this as well.
So this is just another conspiracy or concern scenario related to this that I just want to talk about. I am skeptical that your proof of work scheme will end up on Bitcoin. And if you are willing to accept that that's likely, but you still go through with creating this alternative proof of work that has some sort of inferior aspect to it to the current one, that it's going to end up just giving the next wave of shitcoins their story to tell to get people to believe in them. It's like, oh, we're going to have quantum resistant photonic proof of work, dude. Like, check out my shitcoin, and you're going to end up actually hurting Bitcoin by, again, distracting capital away and interest away from it by making more shitcoins and helping other shitcoins have a story to tell to trick people, and.
So I definitely, firstly, let me say that like I mean, look, you guys have had a rough ride. Like the people that have been involved in Bitcoin for a while, having all these shit coins come out with like crazy. I mean, I saw like New York coins. Somebody sent me New York coin the other day, and it's like cheap mining, super fast. It's just crazy claims, like very funny, crazy claims. And they're like advertising physically in New York. Like they have like posters in an office. And yeah, it's rough like doing something serious and then there's all these people basically just scamming people for money on top of like the serious thing you're doing, right? It's like if Microsoft is like trying to give people PCs and then in like 1995 somebody comes out with like we're gonna whatever and then they're selling operating systems that don't exist. This operating system will use your brain, like you don't have to even touch it, and then like people are sending them money, right? It's kind of nasty. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, EOS is an amazing example of this, right? They just like the amount of money they raise is bizarre. I don't know that it matters so much. I mean, I personally, if there are like scam projects coming out that say they're going to be based on this, I'll personally be the first person to say publicly that you should not touch this. I think crypto is just the way it is. It's unavoidable that there will be some scams. I don't think they'll be big, right? So in the end, they're loud, but they're not. I don't think they're in the end that influential, right? So that's kind of my overall take on it. I don't think they're dangerous to Bitcoin. That's my point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, mostly I'm just making that example as
Yeah.
as a something to think about, because if
Dude,
your
it'll
design isn't good, if your
happen.
design is not going to solve the problems, if the problems that you're trying to solve aren't even actual problems, then you'll end up spinning your wheels in another direction, and we're going to have some these stories for people to tell. And I just feel like every angle I look at changing the proof of work, it just seems like a dead end. It just seems like the same but different but the same, or it seems like the same people are going to end up in power. It seems like that you can't get away from that. You need to do proof of work and burn value.
Yeah,
You have to do
there's that.
work, and even your system is going to use significant electricity. Maybe less. Maybe people will just make more machines and use the same amount of electricity, and but it will always be a factor. It will always be more efficient to spend less, right? So they're always going to go places where there's cheap electricity anyway. It might not be as much of a factor, but it will always be an advantage, even if you reduce the factor. And you're not going to just reduce the factor, you're going to introduce other factors that affect it. So I don't really see why we would want to go and make all new hardware, all new, proof of work, go through whatever the risky game theoretical situations that might turn up in a change of proof of work, with like no real confidence that it will even fix anything, you know?
So I think by the time these are fair skepticisms, right? Like I'm not gonna say like uh, so I think by the time that there's a real chance that optical proof of work gets adopted on Bitcoin, it'll have there'll be real world information about how it works. So you'll see probably another chain using it, maybe just a test net, but I don't think that's enough. So it'll I don't think Bitcoin will adopt it without having somebody else try it. Like you agree with this, right? There's no way. I mean, you think
I
it'll
don't
never,
know. I mean, people always like
but
to say this as a reason that altcoins are great, is because they're nice playgrounds for things to go to Bitcoin.
I mean,
But
look,
yet,
I would love
but
to go
like
back
almost
to
no
Bitcoin.
altcoin has contributed a new thing to Bitcoin. There's like two
Privacy coins
special
will either,
examples.
dude, privacy coins I think are a great example. So I really hope Bitcoin adopts privacy at some point in some form, right? Maybe not in the form that it is in the altcoins, but I
I
think
mean, I don't know. I will say that
there's actually
Monero has
companies
interesting
making
differences to
device.
Bitcoin, but it did
Yeah,
require a totally different design. It does
yeah.
require constant emission. I know it gets down to be pretty low, but it does.
Have you heard of Mimble?
Yes, it's not. I don't think that exists yet, though, as far as a coin.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a couple of projects doing that, and I think that's a good possible route
But
for
I
Bitcoin.
do, but I do think we're going to have privacy on Bitcoin. I think in a
Yeah.
lot of ways we kind of already do. I also wonder whether or not, like, I actually agree with you a little bit in how privacy coins are an interesting part of the ecosystem, and maybe even a preferred method for having privacy within the cryptocurrency ecosystem.
Like you just leave Bitcoin and come back.
Yeah, yeah. If you atomic swap into a private coin or so, whatever it may be, it does give you a nice way to jump around. But with things like Lightning, with things they have planned upcoming, the Bitcoin Core developers are not intending to ignore your ability to be private on Bitcoin. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So in the end, once Bitcoin has, even close to the amount of privacy of any other coin, that coin becomes kind of useless, other than the utility of it just being strictly liquidity that is not Bitcoin.
Well, so I think if if it turns out, like I'm not going to try to convince you with like vaporware and like hand waving. If it turns out that this is a good direction, right? Uh, Hopefully Bitcoin will be not too political to shift to optical proof of work. If it's important, I don't think it should be shifted for marginal reasons. I think it should be shifted because it's important and it'll make the thing grow 10x much more it'll be much more likely to grow 10x based on this kind of system. We could disagree on that, whatever. I think it's too early to even discuss it. Let us do a prototype. But
I want to make
it's
a quick note that somebody in the chat, probably Shinobi or somebody from Block Digest, says privacy coins all spawned out of research done for Bitcoin. Monero was not private before confidential transactions, which was Bitcoin research. Mimblewimble was also an iteration of CT.
cool. Yeah, I mean, so fair enough.
It's
So
yeah, it's just tricky because everybody wants to make like the new thing that isn't Bitcoin and be part of it when it's early. Traders want it in their altcoins so they can get rich easy. Investors want it also so they can get rich easy because they want the X factor. They want it to be 100x, not 2x or 3x. They all feel like they're too late for Bitcoin. But this story has been repeating for,
Yeah,
9
yeah,
years
yeah,
in Bitcoin.
for
Everybody
sure.
always thinks they're too late, and then the
Yeah, but
price keeps
Doge worked
going
out
up.
pretty well, right? Like Doge.
And everybody wants to put their money, put their Bitcoin to work into shitcoins or altcoins or ICOs or utility tokens,
But
and
to
and
be
they
fair, the amount of noise from that is disproportionate to its actual contribution. There's just besides a couple of what I would call like hardcore successful scams like Ripple and EOS that just I mean, I don't know about scams, but I mean, what the fuck, right? I don't know what to call them, but those projects should have raised, a couple million or something before they went anywhere. And besides just a couple of things like that, I mean, the altcoins, I don't know, man, it's just annoying to look at, but it's not necessarily that important. Like in the end, in the long term, like when you look back on this 20 years later, who's going to remember, whatever, right? Whatever coin.
I,
It makes a lot of noise
I think it's important. I don't like to see people lose money. I don't like to. I don't have to.
yeah.
Yeah, I like to troll on Twitter and have fun and give people shit. But that's actually like it's a lot of
No, I
work.
think
And
you're,
and
you're
I
doing
would
a useful
and I would
service.
rather not have to warn everybody about every stupid shitcoin that comes out and why they shouldn't actually believe the snake oil
Yeah.
story. Like it is a lot of friction on the growth of Bitcoin, the development of Bitcoin, etc. Like you have some core developers that are spending too much time, maybe less so recently, but even Maxwell was in there, talking on Reddit trying to dispel FUD. You got Luke Jr. out there trying to fight. It's like it's a
Yeah.
waste of time, man. It's a drain.
I agree.
I guess in a sense you could argue that it's good in that it, in an anti-fragility sense, where any amount that you attack Bitcoin, it gets stronger. But it would be nice to have, less people getting scammed, less people trying to be greedy and steal from other people, and if all of that was actually harder.
100%. And I mean, this is funny. Like, yeah, I promise to dedicate 10% of my time to fighting shitcoins. Look, I don't know, man. I think if people look, here's like the fundamental thing. If people don't seriously look at every part of the equation in Bitcoin and develop better and better technology for it, I think it won't succeed to the same level that it would succeed if people were doing that. So
Okay.
I'm not a developer. I'm not going to work on the Bitcoin code, right? This is
Well,
something that
well, that's exactly what I want to ask you. Let me ask you this. You say that it's going to take people working on new innovations to make Bitcoin better. Did you take the time to talk to the core developers about your idea before you released it to the world? Did you ask them, what they thought about Bitcoin mining centralization, what they thought the possible solutions were, and what they thought about proof of work options in order to change the proof of work, and what they recommended for you to do if you were trying to help with that effort?
So probably the most like the deepest and most serious conversations I've had have been with Guy, right? Who I think is a legitimate expert on this, right? But he's connected me with a lot of people. I mean, Cobra and Luke included, right? Who have reviewed this before it went out, and it wasn't like they were tweeting like change the proof of work while like reading my presentation. We called them after the fact, right? So this is their independent opinion. But I mean, it's very hard. So first of all, it's hard to get anyone's attention unless you're actually public, right? So we got the attention of some people and had these discussions, but realistically, you have to be a little controversial just to even get like this conversation we're having, right? Wouldn't happen if I just emailed you and said, "Hey, man, like I'd love to talk." So you have to at least start the conversation somehow. So I think we did enough before just putting out a presentation. We're not like selling anything, right? So we did enough.
No, my only point is that if your goal, you stated it as if that you believe that it's good for people to try to innovate Bitcoin. There's
Yes,
a lot of history here already. The
I
conversation has
agree.
been had over and over and over for years about proof of
Yes.
work. So there's, you can read, you can go ask core developers what are good things to read about, deciding what alternative
So
solutions are for
I
proof
have
of
I have
work.
read up. I have spent time looking at this and looking at different ways people have tried to solve it. I think I think one of the weaker sides of Bitcoin, maybe people will disagree with me, but I think Bitcoin is amazing in software and weaker on the hardware side, just in terms of the amount of thought that's been put into it. But maybe that's wrong. I don't know, but definitely in terms of going to other architectures like non-standard computing architectures, like this is pretty much, I think, besides maybe like Chia Coin doing proof of space time is a good example of somebody going outside the box, right? And I really like what they're doing, but you know, it, should we be looking at completely different, new, and possibly good ideas? I think so, and I'm just going to work on one of them. That's kind of
Yeah.
the view
Well,
going into
I
it.
don't actually know. I don't actually. I haven't done extensive research on different options for proof of work. I've
Yeah.
heard of the Chia coin, ideas, but I haven't actually read the details about it. So, but I'm not the one trying to make a new proof of work. I'm just the one saying, hey, if you want to change Bitcoin, you have to go through me. That's all.
Yeah,
um,
you're the
and
gatekeeper.
and and so I just think that I definitely have a feeling that if you did go through all of the research and all of the elders on this topic, you probably would have proposed a different solution. You might join your efforts into working on an already existing solution that they hope people would put more time into. I don't know, but in general, I don't like the idea of a proof of work change. I think it's a waste of time. I don't. I like to think of it as this is the algorithm that the most mining hash power in the world supports, and it's the last thing that I want to lose. If you want to try to find better ways to design Bitcoin through pools or whatever other requirements that you can think of, I would rather see innovation in those areas than see it be just to try to break up the biggest company that isn't going to work.
It's not
That
also breakup, right? I think the electricity component is important. Maybe we disagree, but so I think let's talk again, in a year or something,
yeah,
right?
sure.
Think you know what I mean. It's yeah, we're pretty humble. I'm not like making crazy claims, right? So let's just talk later and see where it'd be interesting to see where the system evolves over the next year, right? It's also to get like a little bit of an idea of like the derivative of the situation, not the actual point that we're at. Um, yeah, that's all I can say to that, right? Like I'm not saying like your perspective isn't crazy, right? So I'm not going to sit here and tell you mine. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, thank you for your time, everybody. You can find him on Twitter at Mike Dubrovsky. I linked it wrong once in one of my tweets, but it's there. You can find his website at powx.org. And good luck with your project, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the show.
Thanks, man. Bye.
Bye, guys.